Pogue is actually the Irish for kiss. You might have heard of a band called the Pogues. You might have heard of Post Malone. Yeah. Post Malone is actually a play on the Irish Pogue Mahone, which means kiss my Mayo side.
Hi, I'm Claire and I want to tell you about the best whiskey tour in Ireland. For years I've been telling people about this tour and how good it is, and people have been saying, oh, you mean the Jameson tour? I do not mean the Jameson tour. Now, I have done all the branded tours, I've done the Jameson tour, and it is a very good tour. But this whiskey tour, in my opinion, is the single best one in the country. It is the Irish Whiskey Museum. It is a totally independent tour, free from brands, just about the history of whiskey in Ireland, which, by the way, surprisingly dark. It's educational, it's interesting, it's immersive.
Any questions on that, folks?
Yes, I do. Have you finished?
Almost. Why? What's wrong with you?
Well, you forgot to mention one outstanding feature of my distillery in Kilbeggan.
Some Harry Potter vibes going on there. And at the end, if you choose the blending experience, you get to mix your own whiskey.
Enough talk about whiskey. Time to go and sample some. Hey!
Yes, tasting whiskey now. So I first did this tour in 2017 for my birthday. And I literally have been telling people ever since how much I loved it. And I decided I was going to go back and bring you with me and get it on camera.
Yeah, you know, I'm a terribly shy person, so I mean, I'm feeling all this camera attention very upsetting.
First and foremost, loved the tour guide that we had. At the start of the tour, he asked everyone where they were from, and I said I was from Mayo, and didn't hear the end of it then.
Where are you folks all from? Mayo. Mayo, I heard of this. Anybody who's not from Mayo, do they want to be really, really brave? I mispronounced these words up here. It's Ishka Baha, and it means water of life, and it's the Irish words for whiskey. But it is said that when the English came here first, they couldn't pronounce these words. And apparently, the English word whiskey is a mispronunciation of the Irish word Ishka. Now we're heading over to the Tower of London, and this is where many a prisoner was held over the years. And there's a story told about Grace O'Malley. Now, Grace O'Malley was a pirate queen. She came from a very unfortunate part of Ireland known as Mayo. So she sailed over to London to complain. And chief among her grievances was the fact that Mayo couldn't win in All-Ireland. In order to change this, she brought with her a barrel of Irish whiskey. It was a very successful move. The reality was her two sons had been locked up, and with this barrel of whiskey, she was able to secure their freedom. But Mayo still couldn't win in All-Ireland.
Obviously, I don't want to give the whole tour away, but I'm going to share with you a couple of tidbits that I found particularly enthralling from the tour. One, Scotland and Ireland have always been fighting over who made whiskey first.
And we here at the Irish Whiskey Museum like to think that Irish whiskey is not only the best, which it is, but also the original. Now, our friends over in Scotland might disagree with us, and they do, but there is written evidence that we were making whiskey at least 80 years before we introduced it to Scotland. In fact, the earliest recorded evidence of whiskey in Scotland happens in a place known as the Mull of Kintyre, which just happens to be the shortest distance by sea from, Ireland.
Two, what an Irish wake is and how it became a thing in the first place.
You're all very, very welcome to the Shebean. These Shebeans would have sprung up in pretty much every town and village in the country. They were very, very like the Irish pubs of today. The big difference being these were all illegal operations. In order to avoid paying heavy taxes to the British Crown, people started distilling illegally, and they were making a drink called poteen. Now, poteen comes from the old Irish word poteen, which literally means small pot, and they were distilling in small pots like that. The only problem is, with such crude equipment, that the first alcohol that comes off is mostly methanol. And you don't want to be drinking that. If you drank methanol, it could affect the retinas and cause blindness. In fact, that's where the phrase blind drunk originated. And in fact, if you drank enough of the stuff, you could end up in an alcohol-induced coma. And unless somebody was highly trained medically, they'd find it very, very difficult to find a pulse. They would assume the person was dead, and they'd bury him. Now, it turns out quite a lot of people were accidentally buried alive.
So long story short, before the Anatomy Act, medical students had to grave rob to get cadavers. And when they opened up the coffins, they were finding scratches on the inside of the lids.
And when they would take the lid off of the coffin, on the inside of the lid, they were finding scratches. People were waking up and desperately trying to escape.
Amazingly dark. That is just the most amazingly dark thing I've ever learned. Basically, an Irish wake is a party to make sure the person's dead.
All the family and friends would gather around, and there'd be loads of drinking. There'd be music. There'd be dancing up your boy up the road. Hey, hey, hey. These parties could go on for 3 or 4 days. And if after 3 or 4 days, if the person didn't get up, stand up and drink, they were more than likely probably dead. So it was safe to put him in the box and to bury him.
Number 3, how people died in the Great Whiskey Fire.
And there's a very, very sad story told about the Great Whiskey Fire of 1875. There was a malting house called Malone's up off Cork Street, and they were storing over 5,000 barrels of whiskey. There was an explosion, whiskey caught fire, and it was flown down the streets in flames. At least 13 people died. Now, nobody burned to death. All the fatalities occurred when opportunistic Dubliners were seeing this free whiskey flow down the streets. And they were picking it up in pots and pans, and they were drinking it. Now, the whiskey, perfectly fine. But the streets were filthy.
Again, long story short, because it was a liquid fire, they tried to stem the flow of whiskey with horse shit. They didn't die from the fire, they died from drinking whiskey mixed with horse shit.
Seemingly, that's where the phrase, shit happens, originated.
I told you the history was super fucking dark, didn't I? Or did I not? We learned a lot more than just that on the tour. We learned all the different types of distilling techniques.
And if a whiskey is triple distilled, it'll be quite clearly written on the bottle. Because if it's costing them money, they're going to tell you about it. And if they don't tell you, you can assume that it isn't triple distilled.
How taxation affected every step of the evolution of Irish whiskey, from the illegal shebeens where they were hiding it from the taxman, all the way to modern distilling techniques.
Everybody was originally making malt until the British government decided to impose a tax on malted barley. So the Irish down south, in an effort to pay less tax to the British, decided they'd invent a whole new way of making whiskey. You see, there's a tax on malt, there's no tax on unmalted. So, if you got some unmalted barley and threw it into your mix, you paid that little bit less tax.
Which is amazing, because Irish people are so tight that we'll innovate rather than pay tax. And then we got to finish the tour by blending our own whiskey.
Pick up the first glass on your left, and what I'd like you to do is give it a little bit of a swirl. Now, there's a couple of reasons why we swirl whiskey. The first and most important reason is because it makes us look sophisticated. If you give it a little bit of a shake, and if you hold it towards a light source, you may notice on the side of the glass what we call tears. That oiliness comes from the unmalted barley, and this viscosity gives it a much longer finish. So you're going to feel this all the way down here in your chest. On the nose, very sweet, very spicy. This always reminded me of Christmas cake. But I think that may be because my mom used to put an awful lot of powers in the Christmas cake. This style of whiskey is amazing if you've got like a cold or a flu. Right? And because it gets right down. It's great in a hot toddy because it gets right down into your chest. It's also why they use it in the original Irish coffee. Irish coffee was invented back in 1942 in a place called Foynes. on the west coast of Ireland. There was a lad called Joe Sheridan, and he was working in a Shannon House bar. And one day he noticed that the passengers getting off the planes were really cold. It was July in Ireland. So, to warm them up, he gave them some coffee, some Powers whiskey, and some cream. Now, there was a guy called Stanton Delaplane, who was an American food critic. He was on the plane, and he had this drink, and he was like, wow, what the hell is this? Is this Brazilian coffee? And Joe's like, no, this, my friend, is Irish coffee. And he brought the recipe back to America, and it was introduced to his good pal in the Buena Vista Hotel in San Francisco. And it became so popular that it led to a huge increase in demand for Irish whiskey. Because you can't make Irish coffee without Irish whiskey.
If you were coming to Ireland and you were only going to do one whiskey tour, I recommend the Irish Whiskey Museum Blending Experience Tour. Trust me. All the links, all the information, etc. as usual is down in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you in the next one. Slán slán.